Welcome, weary soul. Tonight, I am your narrator, poised to guide you into a state of profound and tranquil slumber. Before we commence, please remember to engage with the video by liking it and subscribing for an array of additional bedtime narratives. Feel free to share in the comments your current viewing location and the prevailing time. Should there be a particular tale you wish to hear recounted in the future, I would be delighted to know. Story 1. The Remote Alaskan Encounter. I had dedicated numerous months to meticulously planning this expedition. It was a commitment I had made to myself for many years, an opportunity to escape from the overwhelming demands of daily life. I yearned for a respite from the incessant vibration of my phone, the ceaseless flow of work emails, and the unyielding cacophony of urban noise that perpetually permeated my thoughts. My sole companions would be myself, a few days spent in the vast Alaskan backcountry, and the deep quiet my father often spoke of during my childhood. My dad had been raised in a minuscule logging settlement situated near the Kenai Peninsula. He frequently regaled my younger years with captivating narratives of rivers so exceptionally transparent that one could discern every single spot on a trout's back, majestic mountains that appeared to be meticulously rendered paintings, and skies of such immense breadth that they instilled a sense of insignificance, making you feel akin to an ant. He often imparted this wisdom. Out there, you truly discover who you are, son. I had always harbored a desire to comprehend the profound essence of his words. Consequently, when the burdens of existence began to weigh heavily upon me, a stagnant, dead-end profession, a relationship that had irrevocably soured, and the myriad accompanying struggles, I finally resolved to embark on this journey. I procured my necessary equipment, retrieved and re-prepared my antiquated tent, and conscientiously packed my Smith & Wesson 10mm, acutely aware that the philosophical musings of humanity hold no sway over the instincts of a bear. Subsequently, I journeyed northward by air. The itinerary was straightforward and uncomplicated. 3 nights were to be spent along the Susitna River basin. The chosen location was not excessively remote, merely a short distance off some venerable ATV trails, perhaps a mile or two removed from any other established camp. It was sufficiently distant to foster a profound sense of solitude, yet adequately proximate to ensure that, should unforeseen difficulties arise, I would not be left utterly stranded. The inaugural day unfolded flawlessly. The air was astonishingly pure, so pristine that its frigid crispness felt almost searing in my lungs. It possessed a bracing coldness that invigorated rather than inducing discomfort. I undertook a hike of approximately 3 miles, ultimately locating a suitable expanse of ground near a winding bend in the river, where I erected my camp beneath the protective boughs of 2 substantial spruce trees. The surrounding vista was beyond reproach. Distant mountains graced the horizon, and the river downstream murmured a soft, continuous melody. I dedicated hours to the arduous task of attempting to fish, employing the techniques my father had imparted to me. He often asserted that the Susitna teemed with grayling. However, either his recollections were inaccurate or the fish had long since departed the area, as I failed to elicit even a single bite. Not one. It was at this juncture that I observed the initial peculiar anomaly. The fish, those few specimens I could discern near the deeper pools, simultaneously began to thrash with remarkable intensity. Their movements were not characteristic of a uniform darting in a singular direction, as if startled by a predator. Rather, they dispersed in every conceivable direction, as though an electrified wire had been submerged within the water. A pair of them even propelled themselves vertically into the air, striking the surface again with a sharp, resonant slap that reverberated distinctly through the surrounding trees. Then, with an abruptness equal to their agitation, They reverted to complete stillness, merely drifting as if nothing untoward had transpired. I remained motionless, clutching my fishing rod, contemplating that is undeniably abnormal. Yet I dismissed the incident. Perhaps a predatory creature had navigated through the current, or perhaps I simply lacked the intimate knowledge of this particular river that my father possessed. By the waning hours of the afternoon, I succeeded in catching 2 small fish, sufficient for my evening meal. Content with this modest provision, I proceeded upstream, meticulously exploring the surroundings, capturing photographs and deeply inhaling the pervading quietude. Except it was not truly quiet. There was an omnipresent low-frequency buzzing, faint and distant, akin to the sound of a wasp nest situated far within the dense foliage. Upon my initial detection of the sound, I attributed it to an internal phenomenon, ringing in my ears or some similar auditory illusion. However, it subsequently recurred, a gentle, then silence. Approximately 5 minutes later, it returned once more. I meticulously surveyed the valley, half anticipating the sight of someone traversing the distant terrain on a dirt bike. There was nothing, not a single living being. As sunset approached, the sound gradually diminished, and I ultimately dismissed it from my mind. I returned to my campsite, prepared the fish, meticulously stuffing them with butter and garlic, and grilled them over the open fire. It was unequivocally the most delectable meal I had consumed in many months. The river emitted a soft, sibilant sound in the encroaching darkness, and for the first time in a significant period, I experienced a sense of profound contentment. This feeling persisted until my return journey from the tree line. I became rigidly immobile halfway to my camp. Across the river, just beyond the obscuring shadows cast by the spruce trees, a presence moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion, a discernible shape gracefully slipping between the trees like dissipating smoke. "Hello?" My voice unexpectedly fractured and projected louder than I had intended. The form offered no reply. It did not even exhibit the slightest tremor. I advanced a few steps to my left, endeavoring to glimpse around the tree trunks. Nothing. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. Perhaps I had merely imagined it. Perhaps it was an elk or a deceptive shadow or any other innocuous entity. Yet I could not dislodge the pervasive sensation of being observed. I continued my progress, accelerating my pace. My boots produced an amplified crunching sound on the frosty ground, and every auditory perception seemed tenfold louder. Upon reaching my camp, I constructed the fire to a height greater than was strictly necessary. I remained seated, fixated on the flickering flames, with my firearm resting across my lap, reiterating to myself that my apprehension was baseless. Eventually, the fire dwindled to mere embers. I zipped myself inside my tent, a robust model crafted from thick canvas and providing sufficient vertical space to stand. I remained attentive to the sounds of the surrounding woods for an extended duration before the embrace of sleep finally claimed me. I was roused by an intense illumination, not the warmth of sunlight, but a piercing white, frigid, and so intensely luminous that it penetrated my closed eyelids. My immediate thought was of a flashlight. That individual I had glimpsed earlier. Perhaps he had tracked me. I seized my pistol, my heart pounding violently. I cautiously unzipped the tent flap. Nothing. The camp remained utterly still. The fire was extinguished, leaving only a faint, dull orange glow within the pit. The trees loomed, stark black and silent. Then I perceived it. It was not situated on the ground, but suspended above it. A flawless, vertical column of light hung suspended in the air, resembling a divine spotlight. It poured directly from the sky onto the trees approximately 15 feet from my tent. There was no accompanying sound, no discernible wind, merely that unwavering beam solid and stark white, illuminating the tree trunks with an almost sterile luminescence. My throat became parched, and my intellect struggled to formulate a rational explanation. A helicopter, a drone, a trick of the aurora borealis, perhaps. But none of these hypotheses aligned with the observable phenomena. There was no characteristic rotor chop, no engine hum, only an oppressive silence so profound that it exerted physical pressure against my skull. Then, with equal suddenness, it vanished. One moment it was undeniably present, the next, absolute darkness. I remained utterly paralyzed, the gun trembling uncontrollably in my grasp. I contemplated entering my truck and precipitously departing the area, but the road was a treacherous expanse of mud and roots, and I was uncertain of my ability to navigate it in the pervasive darkness. It was at that precise moment that the light reappeared directly above my tent. The formidable beam enveloped everything in a blinding white. Shadows dispersed like flowing water. I recoiled abruptly, momentarily blinded, and that was when I again perceived the buzzing. This time it was not faint. It was piercingly loud, an auditory assault that set my teeth on edge. I bolted, seizing only my jacket, boots, and firearm, nothing else. I tore frantically into the tree line, branches savagely lashing my face, my lungs burning with exertion. Behind me, the light swung like a formidable sword, cleaving through the forest canopy. It relentlessly pursued me. I am unable to ascertain the precise distance I ran, perhaps half a mile or even a full mile. The terrain began to ascend, and I laboriously clawed my way up a rocky incline toward a desiccated oak tree clinging precariously to the hillside. I painstakingly pulled myself into its branches, abrading my palms until they were raw, and pressed myself flat against the trunk. The entire forest was illuminated by an eerie white glow. The beam swept through the clearing below, moving with a seamless, searching motion. As it passed over my campsite, I observed that the flap of my tent hung open, resembling an exposed wound. The light lingered there for an agonizingly protracted minute, before gradually shifting its trajectory toward the hill. I held my breath. My hands, still clutching the gun, felt entirely numb. The buzzing intensified progressively, reaching a crescendo until I felt as though my skull would fracture. Then silence. The light abruptly extinguished. Darkness, as dense as ink, poured back in. I remained sequestered within that tree until the first light of dawn, shivering uncontrollably, my teeth grinding. Every minute sound of cracking bark seemed to portend approaching footsteps. On one occasion, may God assist me, I distinctly heard a voice, my own voice. "Hello," it whispered, soft, almost playfully inflected, seemingly floating upward from the profound blackness like an alluring lure. I ascended higher, pressing my face against the rough bark, and remained utterly motionless. When the initial faint smear of gray daylight touched the distant ridge, I frantically scrambled down and fled. I did not cease my desperate flight until I reached my camp. Everything remained intact. My truck, my equipment, even the fish bones by the extinguished fire. I packed my belongings in less than 5 minutes, my tires furiously churning mud as I sped down that rugged trail, incessantly checking my rearview mirror, as if anticipating something might emerge from the surrounding trees. 2 miles subsequent, I passed another campsite. A family waved, their faces alight with smiles, as if the world were entirely normal. I felt an impulse to stop, to inquire if they had witnessed the strange occurrence, but what coherent explanation could I offer? I simply continued driving. I recounted the events to my father later. He listened intently, his brow furrowed, and posited that it might have been military training operations. However, his voice lacked any true conviction. Years elapsed. I never uncovered a definitive answer. Yet, on certain nights when the city is hushed, and my thoughts involuntarily drift back to that piercing beam, I hear it once more, that low, resonant, angry buzzing, swelling ominously in the surrounding darkness, and I am left to ponder whether whatever entity resided within those woods still retains a memory of me. Story 2. The House on Denali Avenue. I had never contemplated returning to Glacier Point, not after the calamitous events that befell my family in this very location. Some assert that Alaska possesses an enduring memory, that the snow may conceal secrets but never truly eradicates them. Perhaps this adage holds truth, for upon my arrival in town, after an absence of 12 years, the very first sight that greeted me was that particular house, the one that had been the subject of hushed murmurs and veiled whispers in the late 1990s. It remained there, situated on Denali Avenue, perched regally on the hillside, reminiscent of a monarch observing his subjects. The deck was exceptionally massive, a multi-tiered architectural monstrosity that enveloped the uppermost floor, and at its pinnacle, a hot tub was ensconced, like a veritable crown. In my childhood, it was almost considered a tourist attraction. Individuals would deliberately slow their vehicles on the thoroughfare below, simply to gawk at its grandeur. It was impossible to overlook. Its lights blazed resplendently at night, and its music thumped with such intensity that it caused window panes in homes 3 blocks away to vibrate. My uncle frequently indicated it as we drove past, remarking, "That's where the true decisions are forged, not in Juneau, not in DC, right there within that damned hot tub." I used to laugh, convinced he was jesting. It transpired he was not. I had been in the town for less than 2 hours before the specters of the past began to resurface. I had paused at a service station near Moulin to refuel and procure a coffee when a voice from behind me uttered, "Never imagined I'd lay eyes on a Lindstrom again in these parts." I became rigid. The Lindstrom surname carried considerable weight here, predominantly negative. I turned and observed Hank McKinney leaning against his mud-encrusted Silverado. He was the same individual who had once dispensed candy to me when I was 5 years old, now with graying hair at his temples and an intensified bitterness. "Hank," I uttered, forcing a semblance of a smile. "It's been a protracted period." "Far too long," he responded, his eyes narrowing. "Are you here concerning your mother's dwelling?" "Yes," I affirmed, "just clearing it out." He regarded me for a prolonged moment, then lowered his voice. "You are to keep a considerable distance from Denali Avenue, do you comprehend? Nothing resides up there but phantoms and individuals who stubbornly refuse to enter their transgressions." I desired to dismiss his warning with a laugh, but an inexplicable element in his tone caused a knot to form in my stomach. The house perpetually manifested itself, on people's lips, embedded within incomplete sentences, and in the abrupt cessation of conversations when I probed too extensively. My mother had passed away 3 months prior, succumbing to cancer. I should have returned sooner, but I found myself unable to confront the painful memories. She had succumbed to alcoholism after my father's unexplained disappearance in 2004. There was no note, no discernible trace. Law enforcement officials surmised he had likely fallen through river ice or had been mauled by a bear during one of his hunting excursions, but my Uncle Ray vehemently rejected that explanation. So did I. By the 3rd day, the incessant whispers began to gnaw at my composure. Each time I ventured into town for provisions, someone would inquire if I had yet visited the house, always employing that same suggestive intonation. Ultimately, I yielded to the pervasive curiosity. Denali Avenue had undergone minimal alteration. Imposing spruce trees bowed heavily under accumulations of snow. The house loomed ominously at the culmination of the cul-de-sac. Its paint was faded, its windows shrouded in darkness. The deck, now weathered, exhibited splintering boards. The hot tub was drained and cracked yet the fundamental vestiges of its extravagant past remained. I parked a block away and proceeded the remaining distance on foot. My boots crunched audibly on the icy surface. My breath manifested as visible plumes in the frigid air. The closer I approached, the more profound the silence became. There exists a particular type of quietude in Alaska that causes your ears to reverberate, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The gate was secured by a chain, but the chain hung loosely, giving the impression that it was locked when it was, in fact, easily opened. I pushed it ajar and cautiously advanced up the driveway. Broken beer bottles shimmered beneath the snow. A fox darted from the dense bushes and vanished into the tree line. The front door was slightly ajar. I admonished myself to retreat, yet an inexplicable, more powerful force compelled me to enter. The initial sensation was the odor: mold, stale alcohol, and a metallic scent akin to aged copper pennies. Internally, the house had been stripped, its furnishings removed, and the wallpaper was visibly peeling like desiccated skin. However, on the floor proximate to the fireplace, someone had incised words into the wood. They never left. My heart rate accelerated. I instinctively captured a photograph with my mobile phone, though I cannot precisely articulate why. Perhaps it was for substantiation. It was then that I detected the creaking of the floorboards upstairs. I froze. "Hello?" My voice sounded diminutive, childlike. No response, merely another creak, followed by an oppressive silence. I retreated slowly, my heart thudding violently, and did not cease until I was safely back inside my truck. Throughout the entire drive home, I could not dispel the unsettling sensation that someone had been observing me from those darkened windows. That evening, I telephoned Uncle Ray. He resided in Kenai now, operating a bait shop. When he answered, his voice was gravelly and laced with the remnants of whiskey. "You went up there, didn't you?" he inquired. I hesitated. "How did you know?" "Because you sound precisely as your old man did after he started probing around," he responded. My stomach sank. "Ray, what precisely happened to Dad?" I pressed. A prolonged silence ensued. "Do you genuinely wish to know?" he asked. "Yes," I insisted. "Do you recall Apex Resources Group?" I did. It was a colossal corporation that dominated operations across half of the North Slope in its prime, ultimately collapsing in the early 2000s. "They owned that house," Ray explained. "Or rather, the individuals who managed it did. It commenced as a venue for revelry, poker games, illicit substances, and escorts flown in from Seattle. But after a certain duration, that ceased to be sufficient. They began to bring in local girls, exceedingly young girls." My mouth became dry. "Jesus," I whispered. "They would ensnare them with narcotics, retaining them there for weeks. Some were runaways, others were not. That hot tub, deals were brokered within its confines that dictated the outcomes of elections. Judges, senators, corporate executives, you name it, all of them sat their asses in that tub." "Why did no one intervene?" I whispered. "Because everyone who possessed the authority to intervene was implicated." My hands trembled so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. "What about Dad?" I demanded. Another protracted silence. Then Ray stated, "He discovered the truth, acquired irrefutable proof, and declared his intention to expose it comprehensively. 2 weeks thereafter, he vanished. Law enforcement labeled it an accident. I classify it as a cover-up. Sleep became an impossibility after that revelation. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, accompanied by a bottle of Jack Daniels and my father's venerable lockbox. Inside were fragments of a life, hunting permits, sales receipts, and one singular item that sent a chilling sensation through my veins: a Polaroid photograph. It depicted the deck of that very house, its lights ablaze, the hot tub effervescing, and steam ascending into the frigid night air. 4 men were seated around it, cigars clutched in their hands. I recognized one of them, Senator Gerald Haskins, who had recently been a prominent figure in the news concerning a significant environmental bill. At the periphery of the frame stood a girl, perhaps 16 years of age. Her eyes conveyed an unsettling emptiness. Inscribed on the reverse side, in my father's distinct handwriting, were 3 words: "They own everything." That was the precise moment I comprehended a horrifying truth. If they had murdered my father for this information, what unspeakable actions would they perpetrate against me? The following day, a black sport utility vehicle began to appear outside my mother's residence. It was perpetually parked across the street, its engine continuously running. The driver was invariably a different individual, yet their eyes consistently held the same chillingly lifeless gaze. Then the telephone calls commenced. There was no voice on the other end, merely the sound of breathing. By the 5th such call, I was trembling with such intensity that I inadvertently dropped the phone. I packed a bag, intending to depart. However, as I stepped outside, an envelope lay conspicuously on the hood of my truck. Contained within was another photograph, an image of me standing at the gate of that house the preceding day. Inscribed on its reverse side were the words, "Stop digging." I should have departed immediately then. I did not. Instead, I returned to the house, driven by an imperative need to uncover the truth. For my father, for my mother, for every young woman who had vanished and never returned home. Inside, the air felt perceptibly denser, as though the very walls harbored secrets too grotesque to relinquish. I ascended the creaking staircase to the uppermost floor. Snow filtered through an aperture in the roof, lightly dusting the carpet. Down the corridor, a locked door obstructed my path. I forcefully kicked it open. The room exuded an oppressive stench of decay. In a corner, a mattress, darkly stained, lay on the floor with chains bolted to the adjacent wall, and on the floor, scattered haphazardly like desiccated leaves, were identification cards, dozens of them. The faces of young women smiled up at me from beneath layers of accumulated dust. My stomach churned violently. I stumbled backward, and at that precise moment I heard the crunch of tires outside. I rushed to the window, a black SUV, its doors opening, revealing men clad in heavy coats. I bolted down the stairs, through the rear door, and into the surrounding trees, the snow reaching my knees, my lungs burning with arduous exertion. Behind me, voices shouted, and lights sliced through the encroaching darkness. I did not cease my desperate flight, not when the gunshots reverberated through the trees, not when something searingly hot grazed my arm, not until the forest utterly enveloped me. That transpired 2 months ago. I have been in hiding ever since, continuously moving from one town to another. Each time I entertain the notion that I have eluded them, a new SUV materializes in my rearview mirror. I still possess the Polaroid. I contemplated approaching the press, but then I commenced compiling a roster of every individual connected to that house. Judges, senators, corporate executives, the chief of police. They were not prevaricating when they asserted that they control everything. Therefore, should you be reading this and I am no longer present, disregard the headlines. If they declare I incurred debt or wrapped my truck around a tree or perished from exposure on the tundra, understand this. They murdered me just as they murdered my father. And the house on Denali Avenue, it perpetually remains, awaiting the next young woman, the next lifeless form, the next dreadful secret to inter beneath the snow. Story 3. The Enigma on the Ice Road. I never conceived that my existence would become inextricably linked to a mere sheet of ice in a desolate expanse. If you have not had the experience of traversing Alaska's North Slope during the profound depths of winter, permit me to delineate the scene. It is akin to standing at the very precipice of the world, yet possessing an augmented frigidity, an intensified obscurity, and an unparalleled solitude. Dismiss the idyllic, picturesque snow globe imagery often depicted on postcards. In this realm, the snow does not shimmer, it suffocates. The sky is not a gentle gray, it is a vast, abyssal void. And the cold, it does not merely bite, it utterly consumes. I was 28 years of age when I commenced my employment in the northern regions, pursuing the lucrative earnings in the oil fields that were the subject of pervasive whispers. The unvarnished truth is that the remuneration is substantial, but every single cent is acquired through arduous effort, copious perspiration, and the gradual erosion of one's mental faculties. Our particular operation specialized in performing rock analysis for exploratory drilling ventures. Conceptually, it appeared uncomplicated. Subsequent to a drilling crew completing a designated pad, we would arrive, scrutinize core samples, and furnish our findings. Sounds facile, does it not? Yet these pads were situated amidst some of the most unforgiving terrain on the entire planet. To access them, one was compelled to navigate ice roads, transient roadways meticulously carved from the permafrost of the frozen tundra. These were tenuous lifelines stretching across an untamed wilderness, capable of terminating one's life within a mere hour should a misstep occur. This specific assignment transpired in mid-January, signifying the period of polar night, a 6-week stretch entirely devoid of a sunrise. Imagine awakening into pervasive darkness, executing your duties in impenetrable darkness, and retiring to bed in ceaseless darkness. After a certain duration, the concept of time itself loses its tangible quality. Individuals jest about experiencing night shift brain. In this extreme environment, it is considerably more severe. It is as though your physiological being completely relinquishes the memory of daylight. Our designated site, identified as Well 6 to 17, was positioned approximately 70 miles west of our primary base camp, within a settlement I shall refer to as Drift Station. The completion of the requisite tests consumed nearly a full week. By the conclusion, we were verging on mental instability due to the pervasive boredom and the perpetual black sky. I could discern an intrinsic urge beneath my skin to escape, to inhale air untainted by the ubiquitous scent of diesel and despair. When we finally completed the loading of the company pickup truck to commence our return journey, the time was 4:10 a.m. However, the precise hour held no significance. The sun had not graced this land with its presence for an entire month. The ambient temperature hovered around negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit, with the wind chill further depressing it to even lower extremes. My crew on that particular night consisted of Derek, 34 years old, my most intimate companion in that isolated environment, loud, heavily bearded, the kind of person who would laugh at his own jests merely to fill the oppressive silence. Mike, a fresh-faced youth, barely 22 years of age, embarking on his inaugural work hitch. He still harbored the naive belief that adventure constituted a benefit, not a form of protracted suffering. And Ray, in his mid-40s, a former military man, stoic to an extreme. It was perpetually ambiguous whether he was engaging in humor or on the verge of inflicting harm upon someone. We completed our checkout procedure with the pad guard, then cautiously ventured onto the ice road. The stipulated speed limit was 25 miles per hour, and for good reason. Exceeding this velocity risked fracturing the fragile surface, leading to an irretrievable catastrophe. I was partially dozing in the rear seat until Derek uttered something that abruptly jolted me into full wakefulness. What the... I leaned forward. Ahead, our headlights carved two distinct cones of illumination into the profound blackness, and precisely in the center of that beam stood a man, methodically walking directly down the middle of the road. He wore no parka, no insulated boots, no protective gloves, merely jeans, sneakers, and a thin gray hoodie. For a fleeting moment, my brain recoiled, refusing to process the anomaly. The temperature was -22 degrees Fahrenheit, and this individual was attired as if for a casual late-night errand to a convenience store. Mike squinted. "Is that a hunter in sneakers?" Derek emitted a strained laugh, but the sound was unsettling. Ray leaned forward, his voice devoid of emotion. "Slow down." Derek gradually reduced his speed. We advanced closer, the tires producing a crunching sound on the ice. The man exhibited no reaction. He did not even cast a glance in our direction. He simply continued to shuffle forward, his head bowed, his arms hanging limply at his sides. His clothing was remarkably dry, an impossibility in such meteorological conditions. I lowered my window, and the biting cold assailed my lungs like a physical blow. "Hey," my voice faltered slightly. "Are you all right? Do you require a ride?" Silence. "Sir?" I inquired, this time with greater volume. Still no response. Mike chuckled nervously. "Perhaps he's deaf." "Perhaps he's deceased," Ray muttered. I desired to make a jest, but something about the man's particular gait deterred me. He was not staggering as if intoxicated or afflicted by frostbite. His steps were unswerving, purposeful, resembling those of an individual with an ingrained destination. And then I detected it. Even through the merciless wind, I caught a distinct aroma, a pungent, acrid stench that seared my nostrils, like vinegar intermingled with rust. My stomach churned. "Jesus!" Derek exclaimed, wrinkling his nose. "Do you perceive that?" I nodded, unable to articulate words. Mike, bless his utterly naive soul, decided to extend his body out of the window. "Hey man, are you disoriented or something?" No reaction. Then Mike performed the most foolish action I had ever witnessed. He reached out. Before I could utter a warning shout, the man spun. One instant, he was an indistinct gray blur in our headlights. The next, his hand abruptly extended and clamped onto Mike's arm with unimaginable, inhuman celerity. Mike screamed, a guttural, primal sound that propelled my heart into my throat. The man's face abruptly materialized into view, mere inches from mine through the open window. It was not pale, nor afflicted by frostbite. It was simply devoid of expression until his eyes fixed upon mine. Then they were no longer empty. They blazed, not with the warmth of fire, but with the infernal intensity of molten hatred, a rage so utterly pure it felt sentient. And then he shrieked, "God, help me!" That sound, I am certain, will haunt me until my dying day. It transcended human vocalization. It defied animalistic classification. It was something primordial, a shriek violently torn from a throat that should not, by all natural laws, exist. It drilled through bone and burrowed relentlessly into my skull. I yelled for Derek to accelerate. He violently depressed the gas pedal. Tires spun, gained traction, and propelled us forward, yet the man maintained his grip. He ran in tandem with us. His sneakers slapped rhythmically against the ice, maintaining pace with a 6,000-pound truck accelerating at 25 miles per hour. One hand remained clamped onto Mike's arm, the other clawed desperately at the vehicle door. Mike's screams devolved into anguished sobs. "He's going to take me! He's going to—" Ray lunged across the seat, encircling Mike's waist with both arms. "Hold on!" The truck's cabin transformed into a chaotic battleground. Mike thrashed violently. Ray exerted himself to pull him back. Derek hurled expletives, and I desperately attempted to shove the door closed as the entity wrenched it wider. And throughout this entire ordeal, that unholy shriek persisted. Then, as abruptly as it had commenced, it released its hold. The resultant force propelled Mike forcefully into Ray. The door slammed shut. I contorted myself in my seat, my heart jackhammering just in time to perceive nothing, an empty road, an empty void of blackness, as though he had never even been present. We remained silent for the subsequent 30 miles, not a single utterance, only the persistent hum of the tires and the muted sighs of the heater. Mike continued to sob quietly, clutching his arm as though it were the last remaining vestige of his being. Upon reaching the guard shack, Derek almost wrenched the steering wheel from its mount as he pulled in. The guard, a lean individual named Neil, opened the door, a smirk gracing his features. "What? You boys hit a—" His words abruptly ceased as Mike stumbled out, his sleeve pushed up to reveal a perfectly blackened handprint encompassing his bicep. Neil's face became devoid of color. He radioed in the incident, officially logging it. Protocol mandated a search. They meticulously scoured that road for 12 hours, but discovered nothing. No man, no discernible tracks, no drag marks. Neil chuckled nervously when we later inquired. "Hell of a prank, boys. I suppose I'll reciprocate." We offered no argument. Mike departed for home the following day and never returned. Derek and I endured 2 more hitches. After that, the pervasive silence on those roads became unbearable, and occasionally, late at night, I can still perceive that shriek, discern that acrid stench, and I am left to ponder, if it was not a man, then what, in the name of all that is holy, was it? Story 4. The Uninvited Guest in the Wild. I never thought that a simple wilderness excursion would etch itself indelibly into my memory. It was intended to be an escape, just me, Tom, and Jesse. Every spring, with unwavering punctuality, we would meticulously clear our schedules and venture northward into the vast Alaskan backcountry. No telephones, no internet connectivity, no incessant demands from overbearing supervisors. Merely us, the encompassing woods, and a sufficient quantity of whiskey to momentarily obliterate the awareness of our impending occupational obligations. That particular year, Tom selected the location. It was situated 30 miles from any discernible main road, near a constricted creek bottom densely choked with spruce and alder trees. It was an idyllic spot, remote, profoundly quiet, the kind of place where the silence itself felt like a living, breathing entity. The journey in was protracted and arduous, a 2-hour crawl over deeply rutted dirt and thick mud that caused every bone in one's body to ache. My venerable Chevy groaned in protest, as though it harbored a deep animosity toward us, yet it successfully transported us to our destination. Upon our disembarkation, the air enveloped me, clean, sharp, and sufficiently frigid to cause a tingling sensation in my nose. I inhaled deeply and mused, "God, this is true liberation." We dedicated the morning to establishing our camp, 2 substantial canvas tents positioned facing each other, of the variety featuring external poles that exceeded the weight a single individual should reasonably transport. Between them, we meticulously strung a colossal green tarp, utilizing saplings we had cut and resilient white nylon trot line. That tarp served as our essential lifeline. Above the designated fire pit, we ingeniously rigged an overhang, allowing smoke to dissipate while preventing rain from dousing the flames. Tom was a meticulous perfectionist, pacing about, diligently tightening lines. Jesse merely chuckled, operating at a noticeably slower pace than either of us. "You're constructing a veritable stronghold," he quipped, tossing me a package of nails. By noon, the encampment presented a commendable appearance, taut, robust, and prepared to withstand a week of inclement weather. Our objective was uncomplicated: hunt, prepare meals, consume spirits, and reiterate the cycle. That morning, we traversed the creek bed in pursuit of squirrels. The woods were profoundly silent save for the occasional chattering sound emanating from above. We managed to procure a few plump specimens, an adequate quantity for our evening repast. The experience felt gratifying. My boots sinking into the soft moss, the reassuring warmth of the shotgun in my hands, the earthy aroma of damp soil rising with each crouch to retrieve a kill. Upon our return, ominous clouds were visibly gathering from the west. These were colossal, dark, and menacing formations that advanced with remarkable celerity. I vividly recall Tom standing there, his gaze fixed upon the distant horizon. "That's not merely a light shower," he muttered. He was undeniably correct. By 3 o'clock, the wind had acquired a biting intensity. By 4 o'clock, the initial drops of rain were descending, heavy and cold. We scrambled frantically, tightening guide ropes and pulling our equipment under cover. Jesse cursed vociferously when the wind violently tore his poncho from him, rendering it a mere plastic bag, and then it struck. Rain descended like an immense waterfall, pounding with such force that visibility extended no more than 10 feet. Thunder rolled low, resonating deep within one's chest. Lightning flashes were sufficiently brilliant to momentarily illuminate the entire forest in a stark white light. We huddled together beneath the tarp, soaked yet secure. The fire blazed, coffee percolated, and the squirrels were skewered on a spit that Jesse meticulously turned by hand. The savory aroma of roasting meat permeated the damp air, intermingling with the earthy fragrance of wood smoke. We laughed, exchanging trivial anecdotes, feeling like absolute sovereigns of the untamed wilderness. "City boys roughing it," Jesse jested, leaning closer to the fire. Tom grinned, pouring additional coffee. "This is the essence of life." It was until it abruptly ceased to be. It transpired with such bewildering swiftness that I remain incapable of coherently reconstructing the events. One moment, it was solely us. The crackling fire, the drumming rain beyond the tarp. The next, a distinct shape emerged from the midst of the storm. There was no shout, no audible crunch of boots on the wet ground. He was simply present. He approached from our right, seamlessly slipping between my tent and the tarp. Water streamed profusely from his camouflage jacket. In his hands, clutched across his chest, was a rifle. Every faculty within me became paralyzed. My intellect lagged a full second behind my visual perception. Then I moved with furious intensity. The chair overturned beneath me as I frantically scrambled for my shotgun, which rested against a sapling. Tom emitted a strangled exclamation, stumbling backward. "Jesse, good God!" He pitched forward into the fire. Flames hissed. Fabric ignited. His scream, a raw, piercing sound, tore through the raging storm. He rapidly rolled out of the flames, but his hands were already blistering. The acrid odor of scorched flesh assailed me like a physical blow to the gut. Through the entire chaotic scene, the man merely stood there. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, easy!" His voice cracked like a whip. The rifle was not aimed at us. Its bolt was pulled back, indicating no round was chambered. He held it with the casual demeanor of a man carrying a shovel, both hands across his body. Yet this detail held no significance. An armed stranger had infiltrated our camp without uttering a sound, and fear transforms every minute detail into a potential catalyst for alarm. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I gripped the shotgun, my heart pounding so vehemently that it drowned out the sound of the storm. Tom partially raised his .870, his eyes wide with terror. Jesse was on his knees, whimpering, smoke still curling from his sleeves. "I'm lost," the man shouted again, with increased volume. "That's all, just lost." For a moment, none of us moved. The world seemed to constrict, focusing solely on the firelight, the sibilant hiss of the rain, and 3 men fixedly staring at a stranger who should not have been present. And then I perceived his face. A tall individual, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches in height, thoroughly drenched. A cheap camouflage jacket clung to his frame, but his grin, that was the feature that utterly petrified me. It stretched from ear to ear, excessively wide, unnaturally bright, as though someone had forcibly peeled open his face and affixed it in that grotesque manner, and his eyes, pale blue and unnervingly unblinking, even as rain streamed into them. I swear to God he did not blink once, I recall. "Just lost," he reiterated, now in a softer tone. Something about his demeanor caused my skin to crawl. It was not merely the grotesque grin, it was his profound stillness. He did not fidget, did not shift his weight, did not even glance at the fire or the tents. He simply stood there, smiling, his eyes locked onto mine, as if he were scrutinizing something concealed deep within my consciousness. The others did not appear to notice, or perhaps they were too terror-stricken to care. We had little alternative. To abandon him in the midst of that tempest felt morally reprehensible, even though every innate instinct screamed otherwise. "The trucks are this way," I finally articulated. My voice sounded foreign to me. He nodded once. The unsettling grin remained unchanged. We traversed half a mile through clinging mud and dripping trees. The storm had somewhat abated, but everything was thoroughly saturated, the ground slick and treacherous. No one spoke. The only discernible sounds were the squelching of our boots and the dripping of rain from the branches. Each time I glanced backward, his eyes were fixed upon me, wide, unwavering, as though he required no visual guidance for his footsteps, as if he were meticulously studying me. We reached the truck. He ascended into it without uttering a word, water visibly pooling on the seat. The combined odors of wet earth and something else, something sour, permeated the cab. "Where is your vehicle?" I inquired. He gestured toward the old pipeline road. "Half a mile," he stated. We drove in silence. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically back and forth, the sole sound interrupting the oppressive quiet. Upon arriving at his car, an antiquated blue sedan positioned at an awkward angle within the brush, a profound chill settled in my stomach. There were no fresh tracks. Not in that pervasive mud, not anywhere. He opened the door, rifle still in hand, paused, and looked back at me with that same impossibly fixed grin. "Appreciate it," he stated. Then he closed the door and remained standing there as we drove away, smiling in the persistent rain until the enveloping trees obscured him from view. We did not engage in conversation on the return journey. We did not jest, nor did we laugh. The fire was extinguished upon our return, and none of us felt inclined to rekindle it. That night, I lay within my tent, listening to the incessant drip of rain from the tarp. Every shadow seemed to harbor a potential menace. Sleep remained elusive, and here lies the undeniable truth that I cannot dispel. If he was genuinely disoriented, how did he manage to locate us without leaving even a single trace? And what precisely was he smiling about? Story 5. The Eerie Encounter at Harper's Point. I never would have imagined that a seemingly routine drive after work could transform into the most terrifying night of my entire life. When I first arrived in Anchorage, Alaska for a week-long training excursion, the possibility of danger was the furthest thing from my mind. My company had arranged for my travel to conduct a series of internal audits at a modest branch office. It marked my inaugural visit this far north, and every aspect of the state captivated me. The seemingly endless expanses of mountains, the crisp, invigoratingly salty air, and the unique way the clouds appeared to hang lower than any place I had ever experienced. By the third day, my work had progressed seamlessly, and with the sun lingering low on the horizon, yet stubbornly refusing to fully set, I resolved to maximize my enjoyment of the evening. I rented a vehicle, a dilapidated silver Subaru with a prominently cracked windshield and an air freshener shaped like a moose, and set out onto the road. I had no preconceived itinerary, merely a vague notion of heading northward toward the coast. Alaska in the late summer is an unparalleled experience. The daylight persists, bathing everything in an almost surreal golden luminescence. I lowered the car windows, allowing the cool air to enter, along with the faint, comforting scent of spruce. My music playlist shuffled between classic rock anthems and serene acoustic compositions, and for the first time in weeks, I experienced a profound sense of tranquility. Approximately 40 minutes outside the city, I observed a small pullout marked by a weathered wooden sign that proclaimed Harper's Point Beach Access. The parking area was deserted save for a few gulls hopping erratically and the occasional discarded beer cans strewn near the tree line. "Perfect," I murmured under my breath as I maneuvered my vehicle into the lot. I parked near the edge, retrieved my jacket from the rear seat, and followed the narrow descending trail toward the beach. The pathway was steep and exuded a faint aroma of salt and decomposing seaweed. At the bottom, the panorama unfolded into a scene reminiscent of a painting. A broad, rocky shoreline adorned with tide pools shimmering in the diminishing light, seabirds gracefully gliding low over the water, their distinctive cries echoing in the prevailing stillness. It was truly perfect. I extracted my mobile phone and captured a few images, then returned it to my pocket. For a period, I simply walked, nimbly hopping from rock to rock, occasionally crouching to observe tiny crabs scuttling within the tidal pools. The ocean stretched infinitely before me, forming the kind of expansive horizon that instills a gratifying sense of one's own smallness. And then the distinct sound of tires on gravel. The noise drifted downward from the parking lot above. Initially, I barely registered it. Vehicles arrive and depart. That is entirely normal. However, something about the manner in which the engine revved, loud and aggressively, compelled me to glance upward toward the bluff. A dark pickup truck had just pulled in, its headlights briefly sweeping the entire lot before being abruptly extinguished. From my vantage point, I could only discern the roof of the vehicle. The engine idled for a moment, then roared as the truck executed a tight, circular maneuver, raising a conspicuous plume of dust. The tires screeched piercingly, their sound reverberating along the empty stretch of beach. And then the truck abruptly departed, retracing its path. "Okay," I uttered under my breath, attempting to dismiss the incident with a light laugh. Probably just some local adolescents engaging in frivolous behavior. I shook off the uneasy feeling and resumed my exploration, yet a disquieting, prickling sensation had begun to creep up my spine. Every few seconds, I found myself involuntarily glancing back toward the parking lot. It remained deserted, the trees above swaying gently in the subtle breeze. 15 minutes later, the sound returned. I became rigidly immobile mid-stride as the identical truck, black, equipped with large tires and featuring a lifted suspension, rolled back into the lot. This time, it did not execute circular maneuvers. It pulled up near the very edge of the bluff and simply remained there. I could now clearly discern its outline, starkly silhouetted against the encroaching, dusky sky. Its headlights remained off, but the engine hummed, a low, ominous growl that carried distinctly to my position. "All right," I muttered, endeavoring to maintain my composure. "You possess every right to be here, just as I do." Yet it did not feel that way. I commenced my return journey toward the trail, maintaining a casual pace initially. My boots produced soft crunching sounds on the sand and shells. The incline proved to be steeper than I recalled, bordered by dense spruce and alder trees. Halfway up, I heard the truck peel out once more, tires screeching, gravel spitting. It did not depart, it merely circled. Then the sound gradually faded southward toward the main road. A wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps they were simply bored and seeking fleeting amusement. I pushed through the final few steps to the summit of the trail, then froze. The lot was empty. No truck, no sound, merely my Subaru resting alone beneath a sky that had deepened into a bruised, purplish hue. I slowly exhaled, unlocked my car, and ascended inside. My hands trembled slightly as I forcefully inserted the key into the ignition. It was at that precise moment that headlights abruptly illuminated behind me. The roar of that truck's engine materialized from nowhere, and in my rearview mirror, I observed it hurtling down the road I had just traversed. At full velocity, rapidly closing the distance, my stomach plummeted. The truck swung into the lot, skidding sideways, its grille facing directly toward my vehicle. My breath caught in my throat as the driver abruptly killed the engine, plunging everything into an oppressive silence. The windows were tinted a deep black. I could discern absolutely nothing within. My pulse hammered ferociously in my ears. Every instinct screamed, "Do not move, do not exit the vehicle." Then came two distinct slams. Slam, slam, doors. My heart lurched into my throat. I could perceive footsteps crunching on the gravel, slow and deliberate, approaching from behind my car. Then a voice, deep and masculine, delivered in a casual tone that sent shivers down my spine. "Hey." I offered no response. My hands clenched the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles ached. "Hey, you down there?" Another voice, now more distant, called toward the trail. My stomach transformed into a block of ice. They evidently presumed I was still on the beach. I ducked low, extinguished my car lights, and listened intently. Footsteps again, moving toward the bluff, then sliding down the trail. I heard them laugh softly to each other, their voices carrying distinctly in the pervasive stillness. "She's got to be down there." "Yeah, I told you I saw her go that way," one of them asserted. One of them uttered something else, muffled by the increasing distance. And then I heard it, the distinct clink of metal against metal, a lengthy object being adjusted in someone's hands, a gun, a bat. I did not wait to ascertain its nature. Maintaining as low a posture as possible, I cautiously cracked open the door and slipped out. The parking lot stretched empty, the truck looming like a menacing shadow beside my Subaru. My every movement felt deafeningly loud. The subtle click of the door, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I crouched and bolted toward the tree line on the opposing side of the lot. My heart jackhammered in my chest. The woods enveloped me in mere seconds, branches whipping violently at my face, roots aggressively grasping at my ankles. Behind me, I heard them calling again, their voices now sharper and more urgent. "Hey, where did you go?" I ran blindly, my lungs burning, until I discovered a fallen spruce tree sufficiently large to provide concealment. I impacted the ground forcefully, biting back a gasp. My entire body trembled as I pressed myself into the damp earth, desperately attempting to regulate my breathing. The woods were unnervingly quiet. Then the distinct crunch of boots on leaves steadily drawing closer. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my eyes wide with terror, as I observed a figure pass between the trees. A man clad in a dark jacket, holding something long and heavy in one hand. He scanned the beach below, then commenced moving back uphill. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My mobile phone buzzed faintly in my pocket. A single bar of service flickered intermittently. I could not summon assistance. I could not risk the telltale light. Finally, after an eternity, the footsteps faded. I waited until my muscles screamed in protest before moving. When I did not stop. I circled widely, maintaining a deep presence within the trees, until I reached the road approximately half a mile north. My legs felt like jelly, my throat raw from the exertion of my breathing, but I harbored no concern. I extended my thumb and successfully flagged down the first vehicle headlights I observed. It was a couple in a rusty recreational vehicle who refrained from asking any questions when I implored, "Please just get me out of here." I never returned for that Subaru. Law enforcement officials located it the following day. Its tires were slashed and its windows shattered. They never apprehended the men in the truck, but this much I know with absolute certainty. They were not present to extend a friendly greeting, and if I had not heeded that singular primal instinct to conceal myself, you would not be reading this narrative right now.